Greetings, System Failure listeners. Nate and Brian here with your weekly System Failure podcast. How are you this week, Brian? I do happen to know that you're fresh off the plane from the Berg. So what's the report from the from the Three Rivers?
All right. Well, the corporate training, down in Pittsburgh was mostly pretty brutal. It's kind of like, adult Blues Clues for 8 hours a day.
Adult, what do you mean? Adult, you mean like PowerPoint presentations that are apparently for the mentally infirm?
Basically. Let's see. Like, how is it like adult Blues Clues? Well, they tell you the thing to say, and then you break up into pairs, and then do the thing that they just said to say. So it's kind of like where you spot the paw print and be like, "Hey, Steve, there's a clue."
Did they call them workshops?
Probably.
For me, there's nothing more hated than a workshop. We used to have to do those at like religious camp in our youth. You have to do them for corporate training of all stripes, and there's nothing more infantile or less rewarding than having to go and break off into a workshop and act out thing. Oh man, the level of cringe, my cringe needle is flicking into the red just listening to this description. So how many days were you down there for?
Well, it was 3.5 days of training, but I came in Monday night and I left Friday night, so I was there for like 5 nights.
5 nights. And
4 nights.
4 nights. And did you suffer 4 8-hour days or 5 8-hour days? 3.5
8-hour days.
Oh, and it was all wall-to-wall training for 8 straight hours?
Well, yeah.
And did you get to was there a social component to this voyage?
I talked to like some other managers in training, and
But did you all go out on the town afterwards?
No. I did go see Primus and A Perfect Circle were playing over at the Pitt Panthers, the college team at their place. So, I went to that on Tuesday night.
Perfect Circle. Now, there's a name I've not heard in a long time. How were they? Pretty good?
Well, I liked it when Primus played. Well, so the thing is that Maynard, he's also like the lead singer of Tool.
Yeah.
And he also has this other band called Pussifer. And so Pussifer
Isn't it Pussifer? I thought it was Pussifer.
Well,
maybe I've just read it and not listened to it.
I think it's like Pussy plus Lucifer.
I always thought it was pronounced Pussifer. Okay, carry on.
And so the thing is that Pussifer counted as a separate band from A Perfect Circle, and they would like kind of oscillate between the three. So it was just a third of the time was Primus, which was unfortunate if Primus is your favorite band of the three, as was the case for yours truly. Well, anyway, so the training. Well, the worst part about the training really was just like sitting at. Usually, I work at a stand-up desk, and I was just hunched over this little computer chair at these tables for hours on end, and it's just really hard to like stay focused on the material at hand. I'm like way too ADD from years of surfing Reddit and whatnot. I guess the other thing is like I stayed at this hotel, and I guess I was excited because I got upgraded to being in a suite. But I think that like COVID has just like ruined like hotels for everyone. I think that all the hotels started taking in homeless people during the COVID. Is kind of what happened. Or like every hotel I stay in now is disgusting, right?
Wow.
And it smelled like old tomato sauce, or maybe if you've eaten like a lot of spaghetti but hadn't had any roughage, and so you get like the farts. The hotel room kind of smelled like that.
Was this hotel in downtown Pittsburgh?
Well, we were in Shady Side, which is a little removed from like downtown Pittsburgh, but it's like not that far though.
Is this a brand name hotel?
It was the Hyatt House. I don't mean to decry their venerable chain, but I think all hotels, like when was the last time you stayed in a hotel that was wretched, or that was nice? Like there was that hotel we stayed in Hoboken to see David Gilmour, and that was like terrible.
Yeah, but we were looking for the cheapest possible hotel. We were looking for the the prostitute inn or whatever to cut down on cost for that trip. But I would think that your employer would set you up in nicer digs than what we were doing to try to get by as cheap as possible.
Well, I think the prostitute inn is basically what you have to accept. Like it's just going to be like uncomfortable and like make you feel dirty staying in any hotel these days.
Yikes! And so you got in late on Friday. Where did your connection? Did they fly you down to Dulles or to Philadelphia to connect back to Portland?
Yeah, well, on the way down on Monday, it connected through Dulles, and then on the way back, I did go through Newark, and I guess there's been questionable reports about how things are in Newark, but I have to say it was totally fine.
I see. I happen to know that friend of the show, the captain, was at the airport midnight on Friday picking up his wife, who was on her way back from Japan. I'm surprised y'all didn't bump into each other in the airport terminal. Stuart said that, Stuart, the captain, said that on Friday, the airport was bumping. So I guess if it was bumping, it would be hard to notice people.
When I did come in, there was a huge line of cars just like all the way up through the Portland Jetport where you can like drop people off. There's like that. Just the whole thing was filled with cars.
Huh.
Yep.
I guess Friday at midnight, all the commuter flights must be everyone who's left town for business getting flown home. That's what was happening with the wife of the captain. Obviously, she was out of town for business, and so they fly you back on Friday. So maybe it's like that every Friday night.
Well, maybe just because it's Memorial Weekend in Maine, it's like a vacation destination in Maine, that probably added to the conflagration as well.
I totally forgot about the holiday weekend. You're right, Brian. This is supposed to be the kickoff to summer. It's been very rainy in Maine for weeks now, so hopefully we can get the weather to turn. It looks a little sunnier today.
Yeah, like maybe the sun's going to come out. It was kind of sunny the first day I was in Pittsburgh, and then it rained the rest of the time. So their situation's no different with regards to the weather.
Jeremy Clarkson's farm has dropped, and on that show too, the problem they're dealing with is way too much rain. So I guess it's everywhere. I guess it's just been a rainy month or two here around the Atlantic.
It's our reptilian overlords controlling the weather, trying to drown our spirits.
Undoubtedly one of those heart machines at it again, huh?
Yeah.
Well, is that the summa of the good word from Pittsburgh, Brian? Have you got any other... I do want to just empathize for a second about 8 hours of training. How has the crusty bureaucracy not figured out that people cannot learn for 8 straight hours? You could learn for 2 hours, maybe even 3 if you really possess advanced abilities to focus. But no one can sit and absorb information for 8 hours, right? You just they end up presenting it, but it doesn't end up being transferred from your short term to your long term memory because no one has the attention span to do that. Why would they schedule? Why schedule it like this? If you want people to actually, if it's the kind of training where it doesn't really matter and they just need to check some boxes for legal, well, now I can understand. No one really cares about that training. But this is actual managerial training, correct? This is things that presumably your bosses actually need you to know, right? I just can't believe that this is how they organize it. They should work with the limitations of the human brain versus trying to defy them. Does that sound like crazy talk?
Well, corporate bureaucracy is about checking off boxes, and that's what I'm just like a dog where they hold up a hoop, and I jump through, and I ask for a treat.
Were you a good boy?
Yeah, that's how the way it goes.
Oh.
Well, some of the amount of the training was probably useful, but doing 8 hours a day hunched over a computer is a challenging format.
Did you develop a tender knot under one of your shoulder blades?
Yes, on the right side. My right trap, dude, is effed.
Oh, man. Well, hopefully that'll let go for you. You can just, with a little bit of proper posture this week, I think you'll do a lot better.
I guess I just have one other amusing about Pittsburgh, and it's just that when it got to be Friday and I was headed back, I was like, am I going to make it the entire time and not see a single homeless person in Pittsburgh? And but there was one enterprising fellow at where a couple roads came together going over a bridge. There's a lot of bridges, and it seemed like a good spot to do a spot of panhandling if that's how you make your way in life. But I don't know what it is, but there's just no homeless people in Pittsburgh. I don't know how they address the situation compared to Portland here, where I woke up to some people yelling. Some guy was like, "Run, pussy, run!" It was what I heard this morning around 7:00.
Wow,
which is awfully early for a crazy homeless person dust up to be going down.
Yeah, I get they started in on you early this morning, eh? Do you think it's simplistic to think that a lot of that is due to housing prices? Pittsburgh notoriously has not been hit by the housing crisis as badly as other Atlantic cities. So I'm wondering.
I believe that Pittsburgh does have lower cost of living and higher paying jobs. And so maybe something about our situation over here, in Portland, maybe we're a more liberal city, so we're just more accommodating to homeless people more, so we have more of them. Or maybe, I don't know. It is, it'd be nice if we could somehow address this problem as a society and not be swimming through homeless people. I just can't believe, if you had kids, I just don't think you could come to Portland. There's going to be homeless people screaming at your children as you're just trying to walk up and down Congress Street. I think if you wanted to teach your kids about the dangers of like fentanyl, you might bring them down to Congress Street as some kind of life lesson. But you just can't. It's not like a family. It'd be a disaster to bring your family to Congress Street in Portland, right?
I went on a safari in South Africa with the lovely Tracy, and the man was he was Zimbabwean, and Zimbabwe, as you may know, is just going through economic destruction. Like everyone from Zimbabwe is flooding into South Africa looking for work. And I was talking about the deteriorating situation in America, and the man was very serious, and I was like, yeah, I wonder like how soon, like how much further do we have to go till we get to Zimbabwe like conditions or something like that. And the man was very serious. You must never compare America to Zimbabwe. And I was like, fair enough, but I think this man only knows America from the TV. And I mean, it's getting to where there's like gunshots on the regular in downtown Portland. Like to your point, I don't think you can it's not like a family friendly place anymore. No, we're definitely not in a Zimbabwe situation, obviously. But I do think, whereas Zimbabwe is a crazy war zone, we're just like a society that's kind of declining. But I do think that we're like, if you're hearing gunshots from inside your house, I do think that you are, on the scale of, failing societies. Not as far as Zimbabwe has gone, but I do think we're like on the map of failure here. And it does seem like each $100 you jack up the average monthly rent, you're going to get a bunch of people falling out the bottom of the economy who just can't make it work. And they're going to be the most, like the people that no one can stand to have surf their couch for one more day, right? These are going to be the people that fall out the bottom of the economy. They're going to have, they're going to have dysfunction. But I remember when we first started seeing female panhandlers, that was shocking. For the first, in 2010s, you didn't really see that much. It was only in the late 2010s you started to see, ladies actually doing some panhandling too. It had been all men prior to that. Obviously, like 95% of the homeless population is men. But yeah, we're seeing ladies, quite frequently now. It's not even shocking anymore. So why are we called the old podcast system failure, eh? It's going on all around us, and it's a hell of a thing to live through.
It sure is. Yep.
Well, I've got no shortage of stuff to bring to our listeners' attention this week, Brian. I wonder if you saw this one. I didn't tell you about this one because I wanted to see if you'd already heard, but have you heard the news about our friend Scott Adams?
He's got the pancreatic cancer.
Yeah. I got the USA Today article here, but he has metastatic cancer, and it's in his bones, just like Joe Biden. That's why he made the announcement this past week. And so he won't live through the summer of 25. So it's the end for Scott Adams. So just a tip of the cap. I didn't agree with Scott on everything, but I liked his presentation. And he sure made a big name for himself predicting the Don's election in 2016, which was a wild moment. Did that inspire you to read Scott's book, or did you read it before the Donald in 2016?
No, that is what inspired me to read it. And it was great because he just had this blog leading up to Trump's election in 2016 where he talked about like what was going on. And the blog was really great. And then he moved from that to doing like these, these Twitter meetups, or he stopped doing his blog.
Yeah.
And so
Coffee with Scott Adams, right? Isn't that what his Twitter meetup was called?
Yeah. And that's just way less exciting. Having his ideas in a contentious place was super exciting and very tittillating. And I couldn't believe it when his predictions came true. But his like lens, he has like the two movies theory where it's two people like watching the same movie but getting a completely different story.
Yeah.
Which is explains a lot about where we're at and why. I don't know, like, people think that you're Nazis for, preferring the Donald over Kamala. And then, I think that Kamala is, like, basically part of the Nazi regime also. Although I don't really think people who vote for Kamala are Nazis.
Certainly not, yeah. Yeah, I see. I did a move where, when I first moved to Florida, I had this attitude that the South was like a backward district, and the people were unenlightened there. This is just the way that I thought of the South. I thought that was funny. And the humor of that quickly wore off for me. I think that attitude has definitely been leveraged in the blue versus red political divide that our elites would love for us to be endlessly engaged in. But yeah, I do think that trying to cast aspersions on the character based on who someone voted for, well, that's a great rhetorical trick to keep the pores arguing amongst each other. You got to get the pitchfork people to fight against the torch people, and that way they don't join forces and come over the walls of the castle and depose the king. Okay, so I've got another real article here that I actually summarized. This one from the Wall Street Journal. And this article has a little something to do with the downgrade of the U.S. credit. We got a slight ding to our credit rating from Moody's late last week. And so this article here talks about that. The setting the stage here, this has to do with like the deficit. Remember with all the excitement about Doge, cutting the deficit and getting rid of wasteful government spending. You may recall March was a very exciting time with Elon Musk and his gold-plated chainsaw, making doing all kinds of moves, cutting USAID, right? But then obviously the bill that just passed the House, the Republicans just passed it, and it's going to be considered by the Senate now. It makes up for everything Doge cut, but everything Doge cut, it's going to add back to the budget by introducing new and deep tax cuts for the already wealthy, people making over $300K a year. And so there is like a rug pull here, right, or a scam or a fugazi where we pretend that the deficit is this big problem when we want to cut social services like Medicare and Medicaid and infrastructure and things like that. But when it comes time to declaring war on yet another unfortunate regime on the other side of the world, or for slashing the taxes of the super wealthy even further than they've already been slashed, why, there's no mention of the deficit whatsoever. Right? That's the key scam to keep in mind here as I read this little article from Greg Ip of the Wall Street Journal.
Well, I guess I want to say that, I guess Elon Musk is like playing to leave politics now, it seems.
Hasn't he done already? Hasn't that happened?
Yeah. And so, at least they identified that U.S. aid was like, this just a crazy propaganda thing and not what it claimed to be at all. And so we're aware of that now. But I guess you'd have to say that Doge was like a failure.
Yeah.
Which is kind of depressing.
Yeah, it was just like a sideshow with no real change and no real hope to deal with our burgeoning deficit. So without further ado, let me get into it here. This is going to be a very shortened version of the piece by Mr. Greg Ip. This appeared in the May 24th edition of the Wall Street Journal, and this article is entitled, Bond Market to Washington Will Make You Pay. And it's subtitled, The Global Savings Glut is Over, and Governments Have to Pay Up to Borrow. The U.S. situation is especially risky. Let us put the bond turmoil in perspective. At 4.55%, the 10-year Treasury yield is back to where it started the year and still below the 5% hit in the fall of 23. So this week's rise in yields does not signal panic, prelude to a crisis, or a lender's strike. But it matters. It adds to the evidence that something fundamental has changed in the financial markets. The pre-pandemic era, when too much savings chased too few bonds, is over. Governments everywhere must pay up, and big budget deficits are more dangerous. The trend is global, but the U.S. is an especially big piece of the story because the annual deficit's likely to top $2 trillion on the way to $3 trillion, and the potential erosion of the dollar's reserve status. To understand what's happening, you need to dig into the market beyond any single bond to look at how various bonds are interacting. Ordinarily, investors would expect a higher return from a 10-year bond than simply holding Treasury bills from 10 years, because locking up your money from 10 years is risky. That difference is called the term premium. But from 16 through 24, the term premium went negative according to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Investors were giving up returns in order to own government bonds. Since October, though, the term premium has gotten steadily more positive, reaching 0.9 of a percentage point Wednesday, still in line with the pre-financial crisis norm. Still, the big picture is that before the pandemic, inflation was low and central banks kept interest rates at zero while buying bonds. That's quantitative easing. Corporations cut capital and spending because of lackluster sales or asset-light business models that use less plant, property, and equipment. Jason Thomas of the Carlyle Group estimates U.S. businesses switched from net borrowers to net savers in this period. Together, these factors make it easy for governments to borrow. All of that has changed. Inflation is around or above target in advanced countries. Central banks are no longer buying bonds. Companies are pouring billions into artificial intelligence, and their cash flow is down 75% from previous economic expansion, Thomas figures. Deficits are an issue everywhere, but the U.S. is still an outlier. The federal shortfall topped 6% of GDP last year, and under the budget plan approved by House Republicans early this week, but before final amendments is expected to top 7% for a decade, according to independent estimates. That would be higher than any other sustained stretch in U.S. history and more than almost any other advanced economy. Because of the U.S.'s size, this has an outsized global impact. Before 23, it accounted for half of advanced economies' deficits, according to the IMF. From 23 through 30, it will be 2/3. Moody's ratings decision last Friday to strip the U.S. of its last AAA debt rating told us nothing we didn't already know. The U.S. is a fiscal train wreck, which we also knew in 2023 when Joe Biden was president. Fitch Ratings downgraded the U.S. and the 10-year bond yield touched 5%. And yet, events of recent weeks seem to have shifted attitudes about deficits. Elon Musk once promised his Department of Government Efficiency would slash trillions of dollars in spending. Quote, "I had clients that genuinely thought Doge cuts would move the needle," said AJ Rajahayaska, global chairman of research at Barclays. There is no talk of Doge now.
Oof.
Yeah. Well, the fundamental issue here, right, is that we have a debt-based currency, which means that instead of printing money when the Treasury needs money, instead of taxing money off the wealthy when we need to control the money supply, we borrow it instead. Sweet deal for the rich, right? Because if you're a rich person, instead of having your money taxed off of you, we reach our annual fiscal needs by borrowing off the rich instead. So not only do you not lose your money through taxation, but you collect a nice little bit of interest on the money that the government has borrowed from you. And that's what the deficit comprises, right? The interest paid on the deficit in 2024 topped $700 billion. That's the Pentagon's budget, black budget not included, for intelligence agencies, but that's our nominal military spending. We're paying more in interest to the wealthy for the privilege of borrowing their money than we are spending on our national defense. And that's only going to get worse according to the mathematical laws of compound interest. It's an exponential function. And so that is what I think is going to eventually happen to the United States. We are going to have to ask ourselves at some point, is it worth paying all of these premiums to borrow the money of the rich when we could simply tax it off of them instead? And that I think is the conversation that lies a couple years in our future here. Is once the amount of interest we're paying outstrips the rest of if the interest on the deficit continues to balloon and eventually becomes equal to the entire budget, then one out of every two of your tax dollars is going to be redistributed to the wealthy for the privilege of borrowing their cash. I mean, we simply do not need to borrow money from the wealthy. We can print our own, or we can tax it. That's all. Those are the only two tools we need in our toolbox. This third tool, borrowing, is just unnecessary. All that does is, award more and more wealth in a systematic fashion to a smaller and smaller minority, leading to, of course, the same societal upheaval we saw, when the Roman Empire collapsed. So that's what I was thinking about with respect to the downgrade to our credit and this article popping up and the Doge situation. It's all... go ahead.
Well, the article was also saying that I guess our investments into AI are contributing to the situation, which is interesting.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, there is obviously a crazy amount of potentially malinvestment in these AI products that may or may not, these may all turn out to be bad bets. In which case, we're going to see a lot of money. What happens when you borrow money and then it turns out you couldn't make the money to pay it back? You're talking about a lot of money. That's what a recession is. There's literally not enough dollars floating around, so people are forced to consume less than they had previously. And that creates even less ability to pay back loans, and more money disappears out of the system, and you get that snowball effect. So that's what's waiting for us here if we don't reform our wicked ways.
Well, also, investing in AI, I guess, is going to spell our destruction, apparently, outside of just a Terminator 2 style Judgment Day from the AI, awakening and destroying us. But I guess the pathway to get there is also going to destroy us. So that's reassuring.
Are you referring to the Marxian prophecy that technology will ultimately, obviate the role of workers in the economy, rendering them completely unable to negotiate for wages that they need to buy the products that are being made by the AI?
Well, the AI really is like the culmination of the Marxist philosophy prediction, huh?
Yeah, it's like the ultimate example of it, and it is come home to roost. Or it is coming home to roost. Man, we live in a fascinating time. One last item here. The sale of bonds. I feel like you could draw a parallel. We already kind of referenced the fall of Rome here. but in referencing but to find a similarity with the fall of medieval society, I feel like the sales of these treasury bonds are similar to the sales of indulgences engaged in by the church in the late Middle Ages, right? These two sales are like based on making the poor's believe in a certain reality, and then using that belief to funnel everyone through your toll booth, where you can charge them a toll for God's forgiveness in the case of the church. But in this case, we have this, because it's hard to understand like a debt-based currency, and it's slippery thinking, and it requires some real focus. We find ourselves being fooled by the elites once again into handing over our cash unnecessarily. And that's the difference I would draw. That's the similarity I draw between the sales of indulgences in the late Middle Ages and the sales of treasury bonds during late stage capitalism. They're like fugazis inflicted on us by the ruling class. That's what I think anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that just about wraps up the first half of the show here, Brian. While I suggest we take a little break, and then when we come back, we'll hear from Mr. Dave Smith and his guest co-host spot on Breaking Points this week. So let's take a little break, and we'll come back and dive into that. And we're back. All right, well, as mentioned just before the break, our main man, the libertarian comedian Dave Smith, sat in for Sagar and Jetty this week on Breaking Points, our favorite news program with Crystal and Sagar. Now, Sagar, his wife, has just propped out a kid, so he is on paternity leave, leaving the co-host seat vacant. That's where our main man, Dave Smith, arose to meet the challenge, and so I have clipped up some of Smith's and Crystal's comments on the show, and I think maybe the thing to do, Brian, is just to dive into clip number one.
I've been saying this for years, that I think many of the most popular kind of anti-woke, anti-social justice warrior thinkers, they all kind of got wokeism wrong.
Yes.
All along. And this includes Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, all of the guys who kind of were famous for battling it out with these college students. They and this also includes people like James Lindsay and Brett Weinstein, I think, even, who I like very much, but I do think kind of a lot of them, they always viewed wokeism as the left taking over the liberals.
Yes.
And I do understand, like, there is a surface level plausibility to that, to view things like that, because certainly, like, the influences of critical race theory and, even stuff from the Frankfurt School, kind of the cultural Marxism type stuff, the long march through the institutions, these were left-wing ideas. And so when you see every giant corporation and the political establishment regurgitating kind of left-wing talking points, it's easy on the surface to say, oh, well, look, the left took over the liberals, and now they're all a bunch of leftists. But it's really missing the point. And so many of them get lost in focusing on, like, the intellectual history of wokeism and how you can trace it through the universities and what thinkers said what, and, but really that's not the interesting component to wokeism.
Yeah, doesn't that just about tell the story, Brian? We have been on this podcast belly aching for 90 episodes now about how cultural Marxism, like that, how that just replaces Marxism, right? Never mind the unarguable prophecy that you mentioned in the first half of the pod, where technology is obviously scheduled to, I guess the word is obviate, right? Technology is scheduled to obviate the role of workers to the production process, destroy their ability to bargain for wages, and result in a society where only the tiny minority who own the means of production have any money whatsoever, right? But then obviously the collapse of the entire city can't just exist like that, because the wealthy get wealthy by selling goods and services, right? By founding companies that sell goods and services. And the issue, of course, is that when workers can't negotiate for wages, there will also be no one to buy the products, right? In their haste to slash labor costs across every business owner's trying to slash labor costs when and where they can. But what they're doing is eradicating the market for each other's products, right? And so that ultimately is going to lead us into a doom spot. So that like critique, right? We don't ever want to talk about that because we don't talk about class in this country. And one of the ways that we don't talk about class is by substituting this bizarre caricature of Marxism to mean like grievances of minorities, or whatever the woke thing means, really. And that's been a big disappointment. It's prevented us from all of the 2010s, the last 15 years have just been going round and round in this cul-de-sac of wokeism and never having the discussion about what's really happening to the economy. That's why we have the System Failure podcast, so we can talk about what's really going on versus the bizarre consensus you find in the media. Like, note that Wall Street Journal article that I read in the first half has no mention of debt-based currencies, right? No mention of how much of how unnecessary it is to pay the wealthy for the pleasure of borrowing their money when we have the power of taxation. So I loved hearing Dave Smith, who's a conservative, bring this up. No one talks about this in the normal places that you hear economic conversation. So it's great to hear it on Breaking Points.
Yes, we are breaking through the cultural stagnation at long last, especially as we delve further into these clips.
Yeah, it's like a little bit of sober analysis goes a long way. And it's nice to hear Dave Smith slinging it on Breaking Points. What say we dive into clip numero dos, Brian?
The interesting component is what happened right around 2012 when every single giant corporate media apparatus decided they were all going to go all in on this stuff. And it was from the highest levels of power. You can look at those like nexus charts where you track the words like racism and toxic masculinity and transgenderism, and they all shoot up. And so the theory that like these kids got out of colleges and then got jobs in the corporations, well, then you would expect like a slow increase. They didn't take over the New York Times in 1 year. So what's going on here? And then the more you look back at it, you realize why are the CIA and the Federal Reserve pushing these commercials of like, I'm a Latina with anxiety disorder who's a single mom and I work for the CIA. Like, I don't think a college kid got in and took over the CIA. So what did happen? And what happened was, after Barack Obama won his historic campaign in 2008 on the promise of ending the wars and closing Guantanamo Bay and repealing the George W. Bush era catastrophe, he went the other direction and expanded it. And so for his re-election campaign, he couldn't say, hey, remember how I said I was going to close Guantanamo Bay? It's closed. Remember how I was going to end the wars? Okay, yeah, I expanded them. But I'm for gay marriage. But and so essentially what they did was in the wake of the Occupy movement, they were like, hey, here's a Faustian bargain for the left.
That's it.
Well, listen, we're not going to give you listen, the banker bailouts are going to continue, the banker profits are going to continue, but we will send all of our white executives to diversity training.
Probably in Pittsburgh, that's probably where that diversity training is taking place, and I bet they don't have any stand-up desks at all.
Probably not.
This is a great point. I just kind of accepted the idea that, young kids aren't getting a proper Marxian indoctrination in college, and so that's what leads them down this path, this distraction, down the path of this distraction of wokeism. But it's a great point Smith raises here. Like, I don't think it's college kids that forced like Visa and MasterCard to have their LGBTQ month celebrations, right? That is a way. That is like the red cape of the matador, right? Total distraction, right? It's a way to get to redirect the anger and frustration of the public, who are because of our lack of class analysis in this country, are perpetually confused about the nature of what's going on. But boy, in the aftermath of 2008, during the Occupy Wall Street era, man, the people really seemed like it was finally seeping into the collective consciousness that what we have is a class issue here. And all those signs, we are the 99%, all the 1%, that is a class issue. And it's what the masters of our society fear more than anything else. And so I just loved Dave's points here. What do you think, Brian?
It's good to hear Dave Smith talk about it. Yeah. I wasn't... Like, people would talk about 2012 and things changing and not really explain why. Mm. But it's good to hear it like actually talked about on a somewhat mainstream platform.
I've heard people who were involved in Occupy, I've read testimony on Reddit from people who were supposedly at Occupy. So who knows who's really writing these comments, but they would say things like, yeah, we noticed like that, that the process of decision making within the camps, which was ultra democratic, became subverted in the sense that, all right, well, they started organizing people's rights to speak on their like minority status or what have you. So you need to have some oppression points in order to be moved up the speaking list, and if you're a white male like us with no oppression points at all, then you get moved down the list and aren't allowed to speak. And they just said that you could see how like identity politics was inoculated into the Occupy camp by agent provocateurs to paralyze it, and that same strategy was injected into the national conversation shortly thereafter. And we've been going on and on and on and on about Black Lives Matter and woke, and no one talking about the key Marxist prophecy, which is quickly becoming the theme of this episode, Brian?
Well, I think being on the left is kind of like about having, empathy. And so you can get hoisted by your own petard in that way. Because, like, obviously you don't want to, like, oppress minorities, right?
Yeah,
and so they use that against you. And we lost our 99%ism. Which is unfortunate, huh?
Yeah. We have the final clip from Smith. Number 6 is going to touch on that explicitly. So hold those thoughts till we get to number 6. But yes, that's I really like that. We'll get to it. I suppose now is the time to play clip number 3, Brian. This one about the 2016 election, a time that was formative in my in the genesis of my political views.
My colleague Ryan Grimm has really literally written the book on this.
Mm-hmm.
But another seminal moment is when you have Bernie Sanders, who represents, especially in the, in 2015, 2016, this much more class-focused and much less identity-focused, true leftist ideology. And he's rising in the polls, and he represents this threat to the, entrenched interest in the Democratic Party. And so what Hillary Clinton does, recognizing that this progressive movement is ascendant in the party, she tries to out-left him by saying, if you break up the big banks, that's not going to end racism. That's not going to end sexism. And so she substitutes in these cultural identitarian concerns for the universal class-based concerns that were represented by the Bernie Sanders movement. And by the way, it's kind of effective. That's how you end up with Bernie bros being touted, they're sexist and they're racist and he doesn't care about civil rights and all of this stuff. And it works. And then, because it's effective, he and much of the left, I think almost all of the left, frankly, the elected left at least, feel the need to also lean into this language and this worldview, etc. But it comes from the neoliberals and the corporate establishment that want to virtue signal and want to block any sort of more extensive or more revolutionary type of reform. And that's where it really originates. So that has been something that has really frustrated me as well. And
it's such a good point.
And one last thing on this, and then I'll get your reaction. But you can see it now with how the corporations on a dime, they flip from their virtue signaling to Mark Zuckerberg, I'm going to do content moderation in Austin. I'm going to wear a big chain. I'm going to get into fighting. I'm going to go on with Joe Rogan. You can see the way that they wore this as a convenience to meet the moment. And then the minute the vibe shifted, we're done with that. We're going to be over here, hanging out with Trump at his inauguration now.
Yeah. Yep. Pretty. Yeah. That's just it. Crystal's making the point that I got out ahead of her and made about Visa and their celebration of LGBTQ month. You can just see that it's a disguise they're wearing. They don't care. And then another point comes to mind, like the way that you help the poor. Like if you talk about people, what is one thing that everyone who has suffered economic oppression, what do they have in common? They're poor because they've been economically oppressed. There is no better way than to reverse the economic oppression that has taken place in this country than by improving the lot of the poor, generally speaking. That way you can be sure that you're targeting the most economically oppressed people, with whatever plan you have for economic reform. And trying to break us down by minority is just a silly sideshow, and one that worked in the Democratic primary of 2016. But did not work in the general election in 2016. So before we go any further, I just wanted to play this little clip from the Andrew Schultz's podcast, what's the name of Schultz's podcast? Do you remember, Brian? I can't recall what it's.
I don't.
Yeah. Well, if you search Andrew Schultz, it'll pop right up. But he had Bernie on his podcast this past week, and this little clip is from that podcast.
The problem I think a lot of voters had is like they didn't even know if it was her. We didn't even know if Biden was president. We didn't even know if these were her talking points. And we felt that over the last 4 elections, Democrats, we felt that we didn't have a say on who could be president. We talk a lot about the Republicans being autocrats and oligarchs and taking over democracy, but from the Democrat perspective, and I'm a lifelong Democrat, I felt like the Democratic Party completely removed the democratic process from its constituents. And I think they need to have some accountability of that.
No argument here.
I donated for you. I mean, I wanted you to like. 2016, I was like, "This is going to happen. This guy's going to do it," and it felt like they stole it from me. And I'll be honest, it broke my heart when you supported him.
Look, but you have, in the world that I live in, you got a choice. And I mean, a lot of people, including my wife, agree with you. But you know, you're down to a choice. Is it going to be Hillary Clinton or is it going to be Donald Trump? Not a great choice.
But it ended up being him anyway, so why don't we burn it down?
Well, because it's easy to say burning it down means that children are not going to have, food to eat, that the schools will deteriorate, people will not have health care.
I got it.
And I'm an elected official. I got to represent the people.
That's fair.
And I can't turn my back on.
But then could we not also say if ostensibly there hasn't been a fair primary for the Democrats since 2008, are they not also a threat to democracy? We often hear...
Fair enough. That is, yeah, I'm not going to argue with that point.
Yeesh. Heartbroken, man. That is exactly how I felt in 2016. My life in 2016 was living with multiple roommates, one of whom was yourself, Brian, unable to afford like my own apartment because my student loan payments were $1,200 a month, and I didn't have the option to not pay them. Our parents were co-signers on the loans, and it would have destroyed their financial situation if I had declined to pay. And so I had no choice but to just keep working this job, but having all my money go to paying back these student loans. Useless. I mean, the education was useless. Everything was useless. So for me, Bernie's student loan forgiveness platform of 16 was the most exciting part of his platform. And watching the dirty tricks that we've talked many times in this podcast about the way that the Democrats cheated in 16 and 20 to make sure that their preferred candidate defeated the populist Bernie Sanders. I don't think we have to go over the mechanics again here, but it was absolutely brutal. I just couldn't believe it was happening. And so for me, like Schultz, a lifelong Democrat who had never voted red, would never consider voting red, that the Democrats were my team, I had to abandon them in 16. I was like, yes, the Democrats are wolves. We know, we understand. But on the other side of the ticket, we've got a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? And the fugazi of that, the scam, the flim-flam of that is the threat, I think, to our country, right? The Republicans aren't really a threat. Right? They don't. The ultra-wealthy oligarchy does not have the democratic power it needs on its own to siphon off all the wealth of the rest of the country. They need to create the political will, and this wokeism business and denying us the ability, and cheating in the primaries is the tool they used to do it. And then, of course, to paper over all of this horrible stuff to paper over their own lack of democratic accountability, they inflate this caricature of the Donald and just say, well, the Donald is bad and not an option, so therefore you have to vote for us. And we're not going to offer you any kind of economic relief or really any kind of a plan at all. We're just going to spout these woke talking points and hope that that's enough to push us over the finish line. And it worked in the COVID year of 2020, but it did not work in 16 or 24. So I'm really keen to see the Democrats. They're just not going to be able to take donations from the same people that fund the Republican Party. We just can't have that be the case. I'm perfectly happy to have, Republicans represent the interests of the wealthy, as long as we have a counterbalance on the other side of the aisle. We don't have it. We have one party for the wealthy and a second party for the wealthy that, is like a wolf in sheep's clothing. So,
well, it's really a stunning admission by Bernie Sanders. And, speaking truth to power is like this nebulous phrase. It's a kind of unclear what exactly it means, but Bernie Sanders has like spoken the truth here. and it should be like devastating to the Democratic Party, and it should be the basis on which change happens in the future. One can only hope. I mean, they should, like, leading up to the next primary or whatever, I mean, they should like play this clip on repeat like nonstop, right?
Yeah. I don't think that they will. I don't know. I wonder what the next 3.5 years are going to look like here.
Well, I'd have to credit Bernie Sanders for at least coming out and saying it anyway. I don't know. Like, obviously, the machinery that's in place is very powerful and hard to change.
Yeah, so we don't know what kind of threats, like what kind of coercion they used on Bernie, right? Did they threaten his family? Did they? I mean, who knows what leverage they've got on Bernie? We can't see that. We can just see that he claps like a trained seal at whatever the DNC tells him to do, despite the fact that they screwed him and us repeatedly. It's I wonder what titanic forces, what cloak and dagger, factors are really going on behind the scenes here.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like bigger than that. I mean, well, like, we voted for the Donald to be like America first or whatever, that was sort of his platform, and he's kind of, I don't know, not really able to do it, it seems. Or all right, he's just doing the usual Republican thing and doing tax cuts for the rich.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe the Donald is like a wolf in sheep's clothing also. I guess, I don't know. He seems more... I guess I still have this idea that Donald like wants to do good, but probably isn't able to. Maybe that's terribly naive. But I mean, like, you're just seeing like Biden's Weekend at Bernie's corpse up there, and they're trying to act like everything's fine. Is just more distasteful than Donald Trump's bluster to me. But I don't know. Like, I don't know how much anyone can actually like change like the situation with regards to the Middle East or tax cuts for the rich or engaging into 99%ism. Like, you just can't engage in 99%ism if you're like a president of the United States. But that's what we'd like to see, though, right?
Real Clear Politics still has their 2016 primary polling up on their website, and you can go back and see Bernie Sanders defeating the Donald in all their head-to-head matchups, and not by a little bit, by a substantial amount. I also think about in 2020 when the Donald won the state of Florida, and so did the $15 minimum wage. $15 minimum wage doesn't mean much in 25, but in 2020 it was a little bit more bigger deal. And it's interesting that all those the Donald voters were all in favor of the $15 an hour minimum wage down there, especially in the South Florida, heavily Hispanic districts. Usually, it's just interesting to see that. So I mean, like, if Bernie had run in 2016 and defeated the Donald as the polls suggested he would have, he had run as an independent and put up his middle finger to the Democratic Party. There's no doubt in my mind that you would be proven quite correct, right? There's going to be like the president is just for public amusement, right? It doesn't have any real power. There's obviously all these structures of power behind the throne that are working. And so I'm sure that Bernie would have had he would have been lucky to implement a fraction of his 2016 platform. But at least he would have won the popular vote, and it would have been obvious that those kind of politics are the kinds that won FDR, 4 national elections, and that at least it would be obvious to everyone that it would be more obvious that that our democracy has been completely subverted. So I don't know. Even if Bernie couldn't have done a thing in 2016, I still think his election would have been titanic for the overall discourse.
Well, there's just this idea that, gets put out there that Bernie Sanders just can't win a general election, which seems crazy.
Yeah, I think that can be easily disproven by looking at the polling from 16, right? I mean, it's like, obviously the man is the most popular politician in America, right? There's no one more popular than Bernie. Can you think of one?
I don't know.
Not on the national stage.
The Donald?
The Donald. Well, okay, agreed the Donald is very popular. But when he matches up against Bernie in head-to-head polling, he comes out behind, right?
Yeah, well, the Donald really only works because he exposes how crazy the establishment is. Yeah. But, I mean, obviously, it seems the Donald's not really able to accomplish anything.
Seems like they've got him well in control.
But I guess, obviously, the vote of the populace, the establishment really doesn't care. I was watching a video from Ian Carroll, and it was just it was about how, like, it was just showing like who owns, like, BlackRock, like, in a couple other nebulous companies, like, own everything.
Yeah.
And then it's like who owns BlackRock and
BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. They all own each other. It's like a weird shell game. This is what Carroll was saying, I presume.
yeah. Well, he did like a visual breakdown because like some percentage of like every major company is owned by like retail investors. People like you and me. If you invest in these companies, and then some amount of those companies are owned by like insiders, like the CEOs and the people who run the companies and whatnot. And you can just see by the visual breakdown that for every major company, like the retail portion and the insider portion is like 25% of these companies. Wow. And the rest is just like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard basically controlling the rest and each other. And that's basically how I would see the stake of like America, like, or the American like populace, like, in the government. It's just like a tiny share that doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And that probably explains the whole problem. Although, one thing he did go on to say that apparently there's one company that is not like the other companies in this way, and it's GameStop.
Of course.
Which is wild if you know anything about the whole GameStop. If you've ever followed the whole GME thing, it's a wild business. I guess it's a story for another day.
Yeah, if we could condense the story down, basically, all of the insiders expected GameStop to go out of business. Their business model was failing. All the video games are just downloaded digitally now. They don't sell discs anymore, or very few discs. And so the institutional investors all over-shorted GameStop by ridiculous. So there was, there was 2 or 3 shorts for every single share of GameStop available, and so obviously you would expect a short squeeze. Those short positions all have to, if the stock does not collapse as expected, and it did not, then all of those short sellers have to cover their positions by buying GME stock to cover their positions, and you would theoretically end up with a short squeeze. But you just said it perfectly. They only there's like the public stock exchanges where like 25% of the stocks gets exchanged, and then there's these huge black markets where private people exchange shares, and we don't get an insight into that. And so they can use the fact that only a minority of the shares are in the public and on the stock market, and use that to avert the short sale crisis. It almost got them. There was a couple times in January. It was like famous, right? In January of 2020. The stock started shooting up, and the institutional investors had to close ranks, turn off the buy buttons for GME stock, and that was basically how they managed to get out of their short squeeze position by just kind of cheating. So that's very interesting. That is a very interesting video by old Ian Carroll. I hadn't seen that one, but it sure seems germane to the moment.
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah, we don't have any stock in our government is ultimately the problem.
Yeah, we don't have any stock in the conventional sense, and we haven't got any stock in the nation's companies, and we haven't got any stock in our own government.
It sure explains like why the government just kind of ignores people, and we're just kind of along for the ride. Yep. There's
been multiple studies that show that the actions of the lawmakers in Washington don't correlate with the polled will of the voters. You've probably seen these. It just shows that our government is not really responsive to the people because they've set up a situation where they don't have to be. Clip number 5, Brian. Are we ready? We got a little bit more. 2 more clips here from Mr. Smith.
We live in such a globalized world, and these are multinational corporations. So, a lot of these corporations are in almost every country. Mm-hmm. Do you think they're flying the pride flag in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, exactly.
Do they really believe in this stuff? No, they don't. This is pure. And of course, it's such a great example. You said Bernie Sanders, of course, those 2 Black Lives Matter girls who went up and took the microphone from him. And then every single time, the accusation from Elizabeth Warren was, he was sexist many years ago. They would always say the Bernie bros are sexist. This was always, essentially, what it really was a neoliberal takeover of the left using some leftist rhetoric. And so the focus, because if you just think about it, right, the focus in the first, let's say, 10 years of the 21st century from the left, what were they protesting? Well, they were protesting the war in Iraq, they were protesting the Patriot Act, and they were protesting the banker bailouts. Mm-hmm. I mean, they had their eye on the prize. And I'm not a leftist. I probably wouldn't agree with a lot of their solutions I would with the war in Iraq. But I probably wouldn't agree with necessarily their solutions
On
for
economics, yeah.
the economic stuff, but at least they were focused on power. They were focused on the people who were actually screwing over the American people. And so, of course, what do you want to do? Get them distracted. The powerful love a distraction, especially a distraction that pits the people against each other. It's divide and conquer. It's really like the oldest propaganda that you can find. And and I'll just say this, because I think it's particularly to say to you, that the intellectual kind of background of the woke stuff, which I've just, I've read some of it. It's a waste of time. Like, look, that isn't leftism. That was one sliver of leftism. It was one school of thought on the left, and it is by far the worst. And if you really want to see somebody like tear apart the postmodernists, listen to Noam Chomsky do it. Nobody on the right has ever torn them apart better than that guy did. He just absolutely destroyed their entire worldview. And, there are great schools of thought on the left. I mean, like Noam Chomsky is required reading if you want to be like an educated person. You have to read his stuff. And I'm not an anarcho-syndicalist. I don't agree with him on everything, but he's a brilliant mind, and he's got like a real, solid worldview and a way of looking at things that you can benefit from, even if you don't agree with him. This other stuff, the postmodernists, it's just garbage. It's nonsense. And so it's not as if it was the worst school of leftism that they took.
Yep. I guess we got out over our skis and talked about a little bit of this already, and Smith already made the point, but it's just such a good one. I just really think that if we could just get that point out there, right, that it's not that the left took over the liberals with their wokest rhetoric, right? It's the neoliberals, right? Neoliberal means post Ronald Reagan. Well, instead of Keynesian post World War II economics, we're going to where you tax the rich, at a really high level and reinvest that money. Instead, we're going to slash taxes on the wealthy for trickle down economics. So when we think neoliberal, we think trickle down economics. That's what we're talking about here. And neoliberalism, that is what took over the left, right? This lower tax for the wealthy ideology. And boy, it's just such a good point. If people could see that what we have is if people could perceive the current version of the Democrats as the Matador's red cape or as the wolf in sheep's clothing, well, that would solve all of our problems. So I just love that Smith is on Breaking Point's, a massive show on YouTube with a huge following, much bigger than CNN or Fox News or any of these other pathetic legacy media outlets. It's great to hear Smith making a point.
Yeah, well, neoliberalism is basically the same thing as neoconservatism.
Yeah.
It's, there are shadowy overlords screwing us over, basically.
Yeah, when I think neoconservatism, I think regime change wars one after another in other countries to force them to use the petrodollar. That's what I think of it. So they're like related strands here. Neoliberalism on the one side, conservatives on the other.
Yeah, and now we're just waging wars on a slightly different front, like in Ukraine, I guess, and I don't know, not doing anything at home. We're not throwing any crumbs to the peasants. That's for sure.
Certainly not. We got one more clip here, Brian. If you could fire it up for us, we'll finish up our visits with Mrs. Crystal Ball and Mr. Dave Smith here.
I'm known for being a libertarian, but I'm a Jewish kid who grew up with a single mom in Brooklyn, New York. Like, I understand the kind of liberal left worldview. That's what I'm from. Those people are my people. Mm-hmm. And there is something where it was like it's they find a way to play on your weaknesses in the same way they did to right-wingers after 9/11, where it's like, what are you a wimp or are you a big tough guy who wants to go fight a war to protect your country? That was just like kryptonite to right-wingers. You couldn't fight that. You were like an evil person if you didn't believe. And the same thing with leftists with racism. And for leftists, it's like their Achilles heel. And I think they're kind of growing out of this now after the last few years. It was so abused. But understandably, given our nation's history and the history of humanity, if you care about egalitarianism and you care about abuse of power, well, what's always the worst version of that has always been how racial minorities are treated, and not just in our society, but particularly in our society. And so to be accused of being racist was always the thing that would make liberals and leftists go like, whoa, no, not me. I'm the opposite of that. That's what it's their whole identity. And so once you weaponized that, and you could see it even with Bernie Sanders, how weak he was. Those two girls were so obnoxious and came up and stole his microphone in the middle of his rally where 10,000 people were there to see him, and he went, okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
And
You talk.
here's a guy who, was genuinely like involved getting arrested in the civil rights movement and has a spotless record that you could put up against anyone when it comes to, racism, sexism, whatever you want to say.
Yeah, boy, that speaks to me. That's exactly how I felt as your rank and file blue voter for all of the 2000s, and how I felt in the 2010s, post Occupy. Like I never, our whole this version of America is all based on the World War II myth, where we're the good guys going in to stop the Nazis from exterminating, a minority in their own country. And so, to me, the worst thing you could ever be, the last thing I'd ever want to be, is thought of as a racist or a bigot or what have you. And it was really effective. It made it very difficult to it heavily incentivizes one conversationally to not advocate for the exact sorts of policies that would actually fix the economic trajectory of this country. And I do think that for 10 years I self-censored. I wouldn't, because the last thing I want to be thought of is as Dave Smith said, it's the worst thing you could possibly be as a liberal. You were alluding to this earlier, Brian. It's you want to be empathetic. It's not a great situation when people are economically exploited. But obviously, as I already mentioned, the way to fix economic exploitation or correct for it is to fix the lot of the poor. That way you're targeting the economically exploited with direct proportion to their level of exploitation. I don't know. Did you feel that way, Brian? Would you when the first years when we had to do the Black Lives Matter thing, we had to do all of this other stuff and not the tax the wealthy or forgive student loans or whatever the thing is. It worked on me. I think everyone doesn't care anymore. The accusations of bigotry and racism, it's just gives cover to real racists and bigots. And so many people who are obviously not racist have been called that it's lost its luster. And there is no more prominent example than criticism of the Israeli government, which had been successfully shut down for decades with charges of anti-Semitism, right? It's the worst thing you can be as an American, as an anti-Semite. It's the last thing any of us would want to be. And so it worked to shut down criticism of the Israeli government. I think I may have mentioned this on last week's pod, Brian, but I'll dust off the anecdote just in case I didn't. But you were telling me in the 2000s about Roger and his advocacy for the Palestinians and how he was being called an anti-Semite. I was like, but surely that's not a real tactic. Surely that's just a few people. It can't be real. And then we went to see one of Roger Waters' concerts in Boston, and someone had rented one of those big trucks with a light board on the back, decrying Roger as an anti-Semite because he dared to have some empathy for the Palestinians who were on the receiving end of Israeli policy. It was a real eye-opening to see. That was probably 2010, when we went to that concert, or was that 11?
They've been following him around since 2006, basically everywhere he goes. Basically, I think people should be rest assured that 99% ism is going to is the rising tide that would lift all boats and solve our racial problems and various differences, right?
Yeah, we got to link arms with our fellow. This is the great lesson of history. We've got to link arms with our neighbors, no matter what their gender or their creed or their race might happen to be, because only through solidarity do we have power to confront the economic power of the wealthy. That's the only way to match their economic power. Should be balanced by our democratic political power, but it's not, thanks to the sinister agents like Hillary Clinton and their ilk.
Yeah, well, I guess I'd like to think that I don't see how neoliberalism could possibly not have run its course, especially with Bernie Sanders going out there and saying what he did that we played earlier. And neoconservatism certainly ran its course by the end of the Bush years. Everyone was sick of it, and which I guess it appealed to sort of the Christian right, and the neoliberalism sort of has the same ends, but appeals to the left, and so. I don't know. It's hard to imagine like especially like if Donald Trump is not successful in throwing any bones to the peasants, that like neoliberalism seems like it'll have to play a big role. I mean, I guess I'm worried. Like Bernie Sanders is like crazily old now, and so I don't know if he has the capacity to run. And I don't really trust. What's that woman's name?
AOC, Ocasio-Cortez. Yeah.
I don't really know if she's like a true bearer of like a 99% ism.
Can't tell if she's owned or not.
Yeah,
she's got to be owned, right? Like Bernie seems like he's owned too. Despite the fact that he didn't, cut ties with the Democrats in 2016 and runs an independent and achieve the presidency by doing so means he must be owned to some degree also.
I guess like the machine probably. The machine's not going to go down without like a crazy fight, I guess, is what I would have to imagine at this point. So you'd have to. It's going to be quite the battle to like get any actual positive change to happen, and it's not gonna. I don't know. It's not going to be easy, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, that was going to be my point. I feel too that like neoliberalism must have run its course, but I did feel that way in 2010 and 2011 also. So who knows? I didn't see them dusting off identity politics and inserting it into the national discourse in the way that they have. I didn't see it coming, and I wouldn't have imagined that it would have worked to the extent that it did, but it surely did. So I don't know. They must have other tricks in their big Santa's bag of tricks they're carrying around the elites, right? They usually do. So yeah, I don't know.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how, like, what plays out with regards to, like, America's support of, I don't know, like Israel or whatever, as that's, like, a real focal point right now. And if that situation changes, then obviously, I think you could expect further positive downstream changes.
The fact that the devastation in Gaza is being beamed through the TikTok app into everyone's phones, hugely helpful in allowing people to wake up and realize that criticism of the Israeli government not the same thing as anti-Semitism. There's a lot of daylight in between those two positions. And so I'm hopeful that, like you, that maybe the elites have finally. I say they have a big Santa's bag full of tricks, but we talked about Klaus Schwab last week, and these people are not as competent as their money makes them appear. We'll see what they got for us. But man, we've got to be coming closer and closer to an inflection point. We've got a whole generation of Zoomers who are locked out of home ownership and collapsing middle class, rising poverty, rising crime. I mean, everything, the situation is deteriorating considerably no matter who you are. So I got to think that the moment when we're going to stop believing the things the authorities tell us is coming on swift wings.
Well, I'm sure what's in their bag of tricks, it's probably something horrifying that involves lockdowns, would be my guess, so that we can't communicate with our fellow man or get out there and protest.
It's going to involve controlling communication somehow. That's a key. The elites are always looking to control communication, whether it's like the Roman Catholic Church being the only literate people in society and keeping most of the Bible, only disclosing the parts of the Bible that were convenient to their economic regime. Well, I mean, there's a similar thing going on now. People have got to wake up to it. So I don't know, maybe the System Failure podcast, we can play our small part into making people perceive the democratic apparatus as the wolf in sheep's clothing, if they haven't already.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, Brian. Well, usually at this moment in the show, I invite all of our System Failure listeners to log on to systemfailure.org. There, you can enter in your email address to receive the weekly essays written by yours truly directly in your email inbox. That way, you'll never have to worry about missing one. And furthermore, if you'd like to get in touch with either Brian or myself, that feat can be accomplished on the About tab at systemfailure.org. Alrighty, folks, have a beautiful week. We will see you all next week.
All right, see you.